Hello everybody, this is Fernando for the latest Cryptids and Monsters video. Alright, let's go ahead and let's continue the wonderful book, Mysterious Monsters, Fact or Fiction, going again into chapter 1, this time part 10, which once again deals with the topic, Living Pterodactyls Haunt Our Skies. This will actually help wrap up this chapter here, and then the next chapter will focus on a new segment. Interesting stuff though involving the world of pterodactyls. We've heard stories about them apparently being in people's backyards, and then in other stories apparently being captured, and photographs, famous photographs taken of them, and then we'll see what this new segment entails. So without further ado, the first one is called Blazing Red Eyes, and here's what it says. A short time later, in nearby Brownsville on the Rio Grande, a similar creature slammed into the mobile home of Alvarico Guajardo on the outskirts of town. Alvarico went outside his trailer to investigate the crash into his house. When he noticed a large animal next to the crash site, he got into his station wagon and turned the lights on to see the creature, which he later described as something from another planet. As soon as the lights hit it, the thing rose up and glared at him with blazing red eyes. Alvarico, paralyzed with fear, could only stare back at the creature whose long, bat-like wings were wrapped around its shoulders. All the while, it was making a horrible sounding noise in its throat. Finally, after 2 or 3 minutes of staring into the headlights of the station wagon, it backed away to a dirt road a few feet behind it and then disappeared into the darkness. These were just a few of the first of a number of bizarre encounters with seemingly prehistoric birds. Also, in January of 1976, 2 sisters, Libby and Deanna Ford, spotted a huge and strange big black bird by a pond near Brownsville. The creature was as tall as they were and had a face like a bat. They later identified it out of a book of prehistoric animals as a pteranodon. The San Antonio Light newspaper reported on February 26, 1976, that 3 local school teachers were driving to work on an isolated road to the south of the city on February 24th, when they saw an enormous bird sweeping low over cars on the road. It had a wingspan of 15 to 20 feet and leathery wings. It did not so much as fly as glide. They said that it was flying so low that when it swooped over the cars, its shadow covered the entire road. As the 3 watched this huge flying creature, they saw another flying creature off in the distance circling a herd of cattle. It looked like, they thought, like an oversized seagull. They later scanned encyclopedias at their school and identified the creature as a pteranodon. The sightings of flying reptiles over Texas subsided for a while, but then on September 14, 1982, James Thompson, an ambulance technician from Harlingen, saw a bird-like object pass over Highway 100 at a distance of 150 feet or more above the pavement. The time was 3:55 in the morning, and this huge flying creature was obviously a night hunter. I expected him to land like a model airplane, Thompson told the Valley Morning Star, the local Rio Grande newspaper. That's what I thought he was, but he flapped his wings enough to get above the grass. It had a black or grayish rough texture. It wasn't feathers. I'm sure it was a hide-type covering. I just watched him fly away. It was, as the others had described, the same flying creature, a pterodactyl-like bird. Next segment is called Diving Big Bird. Fortean writers Lauren Coleman and Jerome Clark made extensive investigations of the Big Bird sightings in Texas and later published their results in the book Creatures of the Goblin World. They chronicle all of the above incidents and a number of others. They even obtained fecal matter from what they thought to be a pterodactyl. Although they report that the fecal matter was being analyzed, they do not give the results. Coleman and Clark also tell the strange story of James Rowe, a retired Corpus Christi newsman who recalled a story of a man who ran a grocery store along Corpus Christi Beach. The unnamed man was fishing along the Nueces River before the Wesley Seal Dam was built, 1958, when something grabbed his hook, and took off downstream. The thing almost took all of his line before he got it turned around. Then it headed upstream just as far. He fought it and fought it. Then finally, the thing just climbed out of the water on a sandbar across the river from where he was standing. It was this creature with fur and feathers, and it just took the hook out of its mouth, and then it climbed a tree. The fellow had a pistol in his tackle box, so he took it out and started to shoot at the animal. Then, as he took aim, the thing just flew away. While this may sound like a Texas tall tale, it is curious to note here that tales of the Congamato in Zaire, Congo, Angola have also mentioned that the animal goes underwater and can fly as well, similar to loons, grebes, pelicans, and other birds. It sounds bizarre, but then why would people make up this unusual bit of information concerning these monsters? Next segment is called Strange Tracks. The above stories aside, other tales were taken more seriously, even by the police. Unlike most of the others, one incident took place in daylight hours on January 1st, 1976, near Harlingen, Texas. Two children, Tracy Lawson II and her cousin Jackie Davis, 14, were playing in the Lawsons' backyard while their parents slept off the excesses of New Year's Eve. And the two children were playing in a large backyard that faced a plowed field 5 miles south of Harlingen along Ed Carey Road. Suddenly, Tracy noticed something standing 100 yards away. Dashing inside, she picked up a pair of binoculars and returned to focus on a horrible-looking, huge black bird. She described it as over 5 feet tall, with big, dark red eyes, with wings bunched up at its shoulders, which were 3 feet wide. Its face was gray in color and gorilla-like. It had a beak, however, that was sharp, thick, at least 6 inches long. The head was bald. On one occasion during the sighting, the thing made a loud, shrill, and eerie sound. The children were amazed and frightened. The creature suddenly disappeared, apparently flying low over a quarry or borrow pit along an irrigation canal, and then reappeared on the northeast corner of the property, its head poking above a small clump of trees. The children, more and more frightened, went inside the house and stayed. Later, the parents were disinclined to believe the story that they were told upon awakening, but the next day, Jackie's stepfather, Tom Walden, went to the Lawson property to look for tracks to satisfy his stepson. To his surprise, he found several 3-toed tracks from some unknown creature. The first 3 tracks were close to the fence behind the house. The 4th print was 20 yards out into the field, and the 5th 20 yards beyond that. The tracks were 3-toed, 8 inches across, square at the head, and were pressed 1.5 inches into the hard ground. Later, after the police and Stan Lawson arrived, the entire group examined the prints and decided that the children had been telling the bizarre truth. Stan Lawson, who weighed 170 pounds, pressed his own foot down along the bird print and found that it made practically no impression. This thing must have been pretty heavy, he said later. Coleman and Clark also mentioned that Stan Lawson had noticed something strange about their dog's behavior. All day it cowered inside the doghouse, leaving it only once at supper time. When Lawson went to feed it and it bolted through the door into the main house, it had to be dragged back outside. And that night, around 10 o'clock, Lawson heard something like large wings scraping across his bedroom window screen, but he saw nothing. In the morning, he found that the screen was torn. One puzzling part of the information is the frequent report that these strange flying creatures have a face like a gorilla, monkey, or man. Even with a beak, it seems to have a short, flat face rather than a long, narrow-pointed head as we typically associate with pterodactyls. However, some pteranodons had short, flat faces, and some had no beak whatsoever. For instance, a pterosaur known as the Anuragnus had a stubby face and sharp teeth. The Batrachognathus had a flat face, forward claws, and extremely sharp teeth. Such a creature was perfectly suited for eating a goat or even a larger animal. It would also have the appearance of a gorilla with a beak. And then the last segment is called Remote Nests in the Desert. It seems likely that if thunderbirds/pterodactyls live in this day and age, they must be nesting in some pretty remote and probably mountainous area. The most likely area for any concentration of flying lizards still surviving would have to be in the Sonora Desert in Mexico, just south of Arizona and New Mexico. From this area, it would be possible for pterodactyls to still live largely undisturbed and unseen by civilization. Mexico's Sierra Madre Oriental, only 200 miles east of the Rio Grande sightings, is one of the least explored regions of North America. Flying reptiles or huge birds could still live in such a region, especially if they were mainly nocturnal. And then that's it. That pretty much wraps up this chapter here. Once again, or at least this part associated with the topic, living pterodactyls haunt our skies. So let's go ahead and let's talk about that here. As you can see, it pretty much ends on a big note involving more encounters with these pterodactyls or the pteranodons. Yeah, the first one involving those blazing red eyes, that guy who apparently saw something crash into his house. And then when he saw the crash site, turned on his station wagon lights, there he was met with something that he described as blazing red eyes and from another planet. Obviously, once it made a horrible sounding noise, he got out of there as quickly as possible, but it in turn was also going out there on its own, and in other words, disappearing into the background. There seem to be more of those too, apparently, in that area, that Brownsville area. I kind of know where that area is, by the way. It is way south there in Texas. It's an area that is kind of remote, but it's growing like everything else in Texas. I like that report involving the San Antonio Light newspaper as well. I remember, if I recall correctly, that is the newspaper that first reported on the San Antonio railroad lights, the ones that are infamous nowadays, associated with that bus that apparently crashed, but there's loose evidence of it and so on. But yeah, apparently it was also reporting on these pterodactyl/pteranodon encounters too. The next segment was diving big birds. Who knew? Apparently these pterodactyls or pteranodons also go under the water and they can stay there for a while, which makes sense. There are birds out there that do that as well. They go into the water, they go there to hunt for fish. Obviously, they can't stay forever, but enough to be able to catch a fish and then swim out of there. Next segment involves those strange tracks that the two children had seen, something that they described as horrible looking, 5 feet tall, big shoulders, bunched up ones, dark red eyes. And then when they went to tell their parents, obviously their parents were like, no, you're wrong. But then when they went outside afterward, they saw those tracks, and then not only one of them, but 3 of them. And then that's when law enforcement came in, and in that part where apparently it was 170-pound man pushing his foot next to the one involving the track and still couldn't make the same impression. That shows that it did have some weight, as he said. And then finally, the last segment, remote nests. I agree. There's definitely a chance of these thunderbirds, pterodactyls, or pteranodons. If they're going to be living somewhere, they're going to be in the desert area, like the nomadic mountainous areas that are remote, that have just a lot of desert with scorching heat. It would be perfect for them. Nowhere for people to be around, obviously, because of the temperatures and the lack of water, but it'd be perfect for them. So in their case, maybe some of them fly out a little bit more, and that's why some of these sightings are still around back then, and then maybe even to this day. But let me give you a little tease of what the next chapter is going to be about. The Dover Demon, fan favorite, one of my earliest videos that I did, who knows how far back. And so it'll be interesting to see what this book says about it. All right, everybody. Thanks again as always. Take care.